My name is Ranger Kyle Dawson. I worked patrol in the Bitterroot National Forest for nearly 12 years. I know the calls of elk in rut, the crack of branches under a black bear's weight, even the eerie scream of a mountain lion when it circles prey at night. I thought I'd heard it all. I thought I'd seen it all. Last October, I left the service. I wanted peace, the kind that only silence and distance can give you. So I loaded up my RV, drove as far from the last paved road as I could, and parked along a clearing deep in the forest. No cell signal, no traffic, just miles of untouched land pressing in on every side. It was late autumn, and the forest felt heavier than usual. Trees stripped bare, needles carpeting the ground. By sundown, the temperature dropped hard. The air sharpened in my lungs. Every sound carried farther. My boots on frozen soil, the slam of the RV door, even the hiss of boiling water when I made coffee. I remember that first night clearly. The sky was wide open, stars littering it so thick it looked like a dome. The pines didn't sway. They stood perfectly still, except when a thin wind pulled through, rattling branches like bones. I set my coffee mug on the little metal railing outside the RV. The steam lifted, vanishing into the night. That was when I noticed how absolute the quiet was. No owls, no coyotes, no rustle of deer moving across the clearing. It was as if the entire forest had gone still, waiting for something I couldn't see. I told myself it was nothing. I leaned back in my chair, breathed in the cold, and then I heard it. Heavy breathing, slow, drawn out, measured like someone standing just past the tree line, watching. It wasn't ragged the way animals sound when they move through underbrush. It wasn't shallow like a deer catching its breath. It was low, steady, deliberate. I froze with the coffee halfway to my lips. My ears strained to catch it again. And there it was. Inhale, exhale. Too heavy for a human whisper, too controlled for a bear snort. My first instinct was to stand, to make myself known. Predators usually back away when they realize they've been noticed. So I rose from the chair, squared my shoulders. My free hand fumbled for the latch on the door. When I finally pulled it shut behind me, I locked it, drew the shades, and sat at the small table with my flashlight still in my grip. For hours, I lay on that thin RV mattress, wide awake. Every creak in the frame made me jolt. Every shift of wind through the branches felt like footsteps circling closer. The breathing stayed with me in memory, echoing until dawn finally broke. And even then, when the light spread and the trees came back into focus, I couldn't shake the thought that whatever stood out there in the dark hadn't gone anywhere. I didn't pick Bitterroot at random. I came here because it's one of the last places where you can still stand and not see another set of headlights for days. I knew the fire roads, the old ranger paths, and the valleys where sound dies before it can echo. That's what I wanted, true distance. No neighbors, no hikers stumbling across camp. No eyes but my own. The RV sat in a hollow, hemmed in by pines that rose taller than church steeples. During the day, the woods looked empty. At night, though, the trees closed in, pressing tighter, and the clearing felt smaller by the hour. That first night after the breathing, I told myself it was nothing. I kept repeating it in my head. Nothing, just an animal. By the time I crawled into bed, I almost believed it. Then came the scratching. At first, it was faint, like claws testing the side paneling. A scrape, pause, then another, circling slow around the RV. Raccoons, I thought. Maybe porcupines. The forest has plenty of both. I stayed in bed, tried not to react. But the sound traveled. One side to the other. Up near the window, then low by the wheel wells. Too deliberate. Too patient. I forced myself not to look, not to throw open the shade. I lay stiff, eyes locked on the ceiling, listening. Hours passed like that, until silence came back so sharp it rang in my ears. By morning, I went outside, coffee in hand, prepared to laugh at myself. The ground was damp, soft enough to hold a clear impression. I expected paw prints, small claw marks. What I saw wasn't that. On the windows, on the glass itself, were hand-like smears in the condensation. Wide, with too many long, thin fingers. The shape was wrong, stretched, as though whoever, or whatever, pressed against it had joints that bent differently. I checked the dirt below. No boot tracks, no bare feet. Only long claw marks that trailed away into the trees, dragging deep enough to peel back soil. I told myself it had to be kids, maybe teenagers sneaking around, trying to scare the guy in the RV. But there weren't footprints. None. Just those marks in the dirt. By late afternoon, I shook it off. Told myself isolation was getting in my head. The second night began like the first, quiet, too quiet. The kind of stillness where even the wind feels cautious, as if it's holding back. I sat at the small table inside the RV, radio unplugged, generator off. I told myself I'd get some writing done, maybe finally sleep. But by midnight, the silence had taken on weight again, pressing against the walls, creeping under the door seals. Then came the tapping. At first it was faint, single knocks on the roof, spaced apart, like branches falling. But the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. Then a drag, slow and scraping, across the metal. I grabbed the flashlight and climbed onto the bed to shine it up through the roof vent. Nothing. Just frost glittering under the beam. The tapping stopped. I told myself to relax, but the dog knew better. She whined low in her throat, crawled under the table, and refused to come out. Normally, she'd bark at every sound in the woods. That night, she wouldn't even lift her head. Then the RV shifted. Not much, just enough to make the coffee cup on the counter slide an inch and clink against the sink. Something was pressing against the outside wall, leaning hard, making the whole frame groan. I killed the lights, locked the door again, sat in the dark with the flashlight off, my breath shallow. That was when I heard it. From the tree line, my own voice, calling my name. Kyle. Drawn out, perfect, exact. My tone, my inflection, coming from the dark beyond the pines. The dog whimpered under the table, claws scraping at the linoleum as she pressed herself tighter against the corner. I couldn't move. My chest felt locked. Again, the voice called out, louder, sharper, this time overlapping, like 2 versions of me speaking at once, a second behind the first. I pressed my palms to my ears, rocking in the dark. That's when the radio came to life. I swear, I'd pulled the cord. I'd set it on the shelf, but it burst into static so violent it rattled the glassware. Beneath the noise, a voice forced itself through, guttural, distorted, syllables tearing like they were dragged across broken metal. Let us. I taped the windows from the inside. Not because tape would stop anything, because rituals steady the hands when everything else is unsteady. I ran strips across the glass, pressed thick towels into the gaps, pulled the blinds down until only the thinnest seam of light remained. The RV had become a shell, a fragile island of metal and plywood in a sea of trees. Every shadow outside looked like an accusation. I told myself I would wait it out. Sit, breathe, hold the line until daylight. But waiting is its own kind of pressure. Time compresses when you are trying to will nothing to happen. Every minute stretches into its own small eternity. I sat in the dark with the hunting knife beside me, the cool metal a poor comfort against the heat of my palms. Footsteps started just after midnight. At first they were soft, thin, toe-tip taps on the loam, as if something were testing the ground like a man stepping over a puddle. Then they circled. A careful, patient ring around the RV, moving slow enough that I could tell the rhythm was intentional. 1 step, pause. 2 steps, turn, walk, pause, close, far. They moved like a rope being pulled taut around me, methodical and patient, never letting the sound resolve into anything familiar. I counted them because counting made me feel less like prey. The dog, still under the table, kept her head low and didn't growl. She had that look, animal eyes that had seen too many human lies, and even she held still. The footsteps traced the perimeter for hours, an endless orbit that never let me relax. At 3 in the morning, the sound changed. The footsteps stopped. The woods collected themselves like a held breath. Then, slow and deliberate, something began to work at the door lock. First came a scraping, thin at first, then a slow, rasping grind as if a stone were being rubbed across metal. The handle trembled with each touch. My heartbeat punched under my ribs. I felt the air in the RV pull tight around me. I pressed myself against the floor, peeking through a hairline gap in the blinds. The slit of view was narrower than a coin, but it was enough. I saw it. Even now, describing it, the image raises a cold film over my skin. It was too... The features seemed to be a photograph stretched across a surface that didn't fit it. The eyes were set too far apart and too still, not darting like an animal's or focusing like a person's, just fixated, as if they were lenses probing for a detail beyond the glass. It stared directly at the window where I hid. There was a moment, just a breath, where the pane became a mirror and I could see my own face reflected over its. My own wide eyes, pale in the thin light, and opposite them, those elongated features studying me with a patience that felt worse than any rage. I killed the light. Everything went black as if someone had folded the world in on itself. I moved to the bathroom and shut the door, the thin plastic sliding with a scraped sound that still echoes in my head. I curled on the cold floor by the sink, the hunting knife clutched in both hands like a promise. Behind the closed door, the cabinets rattled when the RV flexed. My breath sounded too loud, a drumbeat I could not steady. Silence settled, absolute, then broken by the thinnest of sounds. A voice, my voice, calling out from somewhere directly outside the RV. "Kyle!" it shouted, my name in my own cadence, the accent of 100 little ticks I didn't know anyone else would mimic. The sound came from the trees and wrapped around the shell of the RV. It was me, I thought, until I remembered the knot of dread at the base of my skull. It was me, but wrong. The pitch carried an extra raggedness, like someone pulling the strings of my voice through a box of gravel. For a second I believed it, believed a human had come, believed rescue had arrived. Instinct flickered. Open the door, step into the cold, pull whatever friend this was out of the forest. My hand went to the handle. A dozen tiny rationales stacked up. Maybe a lost hiker, a ranger, a kid playing sick. Then the voice came again. This time it was layered. One voice calling my name, then another, a moment later, and another, a distorted chorus that crested into something unrecognizable. It wasn't calling me. It was practicing me. I realized then, with a slow, awful clarity, that it had been watching long enough to learn the way I sounded when I was afraid, how my vowels slurred when I was half asleep. I listened to the way my own name echoed among the trees and tried to imagine, then stopped myself. Imagination had stopped being a tool. It had become a danger, an opening to thoughts that made the muscles in my jaw clench. I stayed in that bathroom until the first dull gray of morning smeared the blinds. I dared not move except to breathe shallowly and to hold the knife until my fingertips went white. At dawn, the shape at the window had gone. The scratches on the lock were new and deep, as if someone had spent the entire night testing a stubborn door. Outside, the ground was marked by circles, overlapping paths cut into the loam and littered with the flayed remnants of bark and fur. But there were no footprints leading away, no tracks that might tell me where it had gone. Only the clean, empty ring of soil where whatever had been circling the RV had walked, again and again, tracing me out in the cold light. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the quiet, and understood something that had been forming like ice in my chest. This thing had watched, had learned, had practiced. And whatever it had learned, it intended to use. Just before dawn, when the sky had only begun to pale, the sound I feared most came, not from outside, but from within. The lock. I heard it shift. A soft click, then another. Metal tumblers giving way without a hand on them. Then, slow as breath, the RV door creaked open. The hinges gave a long groan that cut through the silence. I didn't move. I pressed myself into the bathroom corner, knife in hand, every muscle stiff as wood. The dog didn't make a sound this time. Not a whimper, not a growl. She just flattened herself against the floor, ears pinned back, as if she understood what was happening better than I did. The sound came next. Bare feet dragging across linoleum. The weight of each step uneven, too heavy, then too light, like someone walking with joints bent wrong. It moved with no hurry. Step, pause, step again. Each drag carried grit from the clearing, small grains scratching against the floor. Then the breathing. Inches away, right outside the thin plastic of the bathroom door. Slow, heavy pulls of air. Each inhale tugged at the silence. Each exhale seeped through the crack under the door, damp and close, like it was leaning low to smell me. The handle rattled. Once, twice, a sharp jolt that made the cheap door shiver on its track. My grip tightened on the knife until the bones in my hand ached. I didn't dare breathe. And then, nothing. No footsteps, no scraping, no breathing. Silence dropped, so absolute it made my ears ring. The only sound left was my own heart battering the inside of my chest. I stayed that way until daylight forced its way through the blinds, gray and weak, but enough. Enough to make me believe the night had ended. Enough to make me open the bathroom door. The RV was empty. The front door stood wide open. Cold air flooded in, carrying with it the smell of soil and damp bark. Dirt tracked across the floor in uneven trails, weaving from the door through the narrow aisle. On the walls, every panel bore fresh marks, long gouges dragged in erratic patterns, as if claws had raked them while moving slow, testing every surface, claiming it. I didn't touch a thing. I didn't clean.